Alrighty guys, welcome to video number, I think we're at video number 4 in the series, but it's the third training video in the series. It's called The Inner Game of Sales, Developing the Mindset of an Elite Level Salesperson. So what we're going to cover is some common sales myths and limiting beliefs. We're going to cover, not 3, I actually added more, but we're going to cover winning frames and mental cues to hold on your sales calls. And then we're going to talk about cultivating conviction and then how to get in the flow state, or this feeling of poise is what I call it. So let's get into the myths. So some of this stuff, if you're a little experienced as a salesperson, this might be a given. Some of this stuff, even if you're experienced, is actually going to be a cool thing to think about. I'm actually going to address some experienced salespeople myths I find too. So number one is that, and this is very common, right? Like the number one is that you must be, high energy, high pressure, extroverted, enthusiastic, to be a good salesperson. Or even something I hear all the time is you got to be in peak state, right? And in a sense, yes, you have to be in peak state to where you're in a good energy, right? And you don't have any brain fog, you have a lot of energy, you feel good, but you don't have to be in peak state like Tony Robbins' peak state, where you're yelling and chanting and doing jumping jacks and any of that stuff. None of that stuff is true. And in fact, if good sales for you is dependent on being in peak state, then you're really using it as a crutch, right? What happens if life happens and for some reason you don't feel as good the next day? What happens then? So you don't want to be dependent on it. You want to have the belief that even if I feel like crap, I can be a phenomenal salesperson. So look, the big thing with the high energy, high pressure thing is that normal people have an association, your everyday prospects have an association between these qualities and salespeople. Therefore, when you display these qualities, you're going to trigger the prospect to bring up all their preconceived notions, habits, defense mechanisms, responses, etc., reflexes that they have with traditional salespeople, right? If you act like a salesperson, you're going to trigger all of those things and those responses that they've developed over the years as a defense mechanism towards salespeople, okay? It could be even little things like this. Just showing up overly enthusiastic could literally cause somebody from the very beginning to tell themselves, I'm not making a decision on this call, right? There's just no benefit to doing stuff that's going to associate you with a group of people you don't want to be associated with, right? You don't want them to label you that way, okay? Now, I'm not suggesting that you mislead somebody and don't tell them you're a salesperson or whatever, right? It's more of your behavior should trigger the prospect to associate you as an expert, not a salesperson, right? As an expert, leader, advisor, not a salesperson, right? Doesn't mean you're lying or misleading anybody, but that's what you want your behavior to really trigger in the prospect, right? That's how you want them to perceive it. And the easiest way to hold the expert frame on the call, believe it or not, is to actually become an expert. And that's actually not hard. I'll give you some steps on how to do that later, no matter what you're selling. But again, just on the overly extroverted, gift the gab, high energy, high pressure stuff. I am not really overly extroverted. I'm pretty ambiverted. I'm both. I grew up my life pretty awkward, not good at social skills at all. And I've had insane results as a salesperson, okay? So I use me as proof. You definitely don't need to be this crazy talker, etc., right? Another one is that men are better at sales than women, or women are better at sales than men, right? First I think 10 years ago is men are better at sales than women. And then recently, at least in our industry, a lot of people are oh man, women are better at sales than men. I just tell you from experience, neither is true, okay? The person who is the best at sales is the person who masters everything we talked about in this series, right? Who puts in the reps, has the experience, is always trying to get better, is always trying to improve, is always trying to grow, and is doing trainings like this and mastering what's inside. That's who's going to be the best. So believe me, after consulting, 1,000+ sales teams at this point, and just also seeing hundreds of salespeople go through my organization, training sales teams and my internal sales team at the highest level, I can just tell you I have the data that it doesn't matter. We've had phenomenal women on our team. We've had phenomenal men. We've had women who didn't work out on our team and churned out and didn't perform. We've had men who've done the same, right? Now, I would say, just as a caveat, 1% of companies are going to see differences in performance based on sex or gender. They are the anomalies, though. So I'll give you an example. If you're selling divorce coaching or legal services, men may want to talk to men, women may want to talk to women. If you're selling coaching on helping women have more orgasms consistently, which is a thing, by the way, you probably don't want to be a guy, right? If the overarching messaging of your company is all about developing a community of men or a community of women, like a brotherhood or a sisterhood, right? To talk about these things that, are things that maybe men only understand with men or women only understand with women. Okay, well, if you have a company where your messaging is all about that, then having women as salespeople or men as salespeople, vice versa, it's just going to be kind of incongruent, right? It does not really make sense. But in most cases, it almost never matters. And people who think it matters, it doesn't matter. So like I've seen women's hormonal health programs, women or men's dating actually. I've seen, in fact, you could make an argument sometimes that the opposite sex does better there. Weight loss, women or men's, doesn't matter. Therapy or coaching related services, doesn't matter. So again, generally, one's not better than the other. There could be some nuances depending on the offer. Hopefully that gave you some thoughts. So next one is salespeople are born, not made, right? So people love to call, somebody who's good at sales a natural sale. Oh, you're just such a natural salesperson. And I do think that some people are kind of born, or maybe it's not through nature, it's through nurture, whatever, with the gift of gab. And some people are going to be more inclined, for sure, to be really great public speakers or content creators. Now, again, I think anybody can do either of those. But some people certainly, like from what I've seen, man, they just have this innate ability that they grew up with or were born with or somehow developed through nurture, whatever, that allows them to just be these public figures or just be amazing in front of a group of people. But when it comes to this style of selling, right, what we're talking about in this training series, which is consultative selling, dealing with complex products that are priced high, premium pricing, right? The gift of gab isn't going to help you, right? Being this amazing public speaker might not work against you, but it's not going to help you. Case in point, imagine getting on a sales call with Gary Vee. Okay, you guys probably know who Gary Vee is. If you watch an interview where Gary Vee's interviewing somebody else, it's almost viscerally uncomfortable because you tune in to watch somebody like Mark Zuckerberg or whoever, and you want to hear from Mark Zuckerberg, right? But Gary's like cutting him off, talking over him, talking the entire time. You're like, what are you doing, right? So, but he's a great public speaker. Like that dude just gets up there and I don't know if he does any prep when he does public speaking, just gets up there and just starts ripping, right? Okay, well, look, great for public speaking. You don't want to buy from that. Like imagine being on a sales call getting sold from it. It'd be so aggravating. It's actually the opposite of everything that we teach. Okay? So the other thing with this is that just telling yourself that you're not a natural salesperson, it's so destructive. Like, I don't know what it is about sales. I just think it's because people have so much avoidance around the rejection that's involved with it, that people label and identify themselves as, oh, I'm just not a salesperson. That is not serving you. And it's also, for most people, it's like saying like, oh, I'm just not a natural at riding a bike, but you never even tried to ride a bike. Or I'm not a natural swimmer, but you've never even taken a swimming lesson. And so, again, like, I do believe that some people, like I'd be remiss if I were to say that some of my success isn't because I was born with some sort of character traits or I was nurtured and developed with some sort of traits that really helped me become great at this, right? For sure, like I get there's some innate ability, and you probably do need to have that if you want to get to top 1% or beyond. Maybe even not top 1, but top 0.01, right? But to get very good, like top 5, 10 percentile of salespeople in your industry, I do not think you have to have any sort of innate ability at all. And I think that goes for really most skills too. Is, if you're going to become the best basketball player in the world, for sure, you got to be born with some stuff, right? And you have to have some nurture stuff early in your childhood that works for you, for sure. And then you also got to do all the things everybody else does. You got to put in the work. It's not given, right? But, look, I think anybody could become pretty damn good at basketball. Doesn't mean you're going to be, playing in the NBA. Like that's the top 0.001 percentile, right? But it doesn't mean like you could be the best person in almost any adult rec league that you could join? Yeah, for sure. Like I think that's achievable for anybody putting in enough effort over a long enough time frame. So moving on, sales is manipulation, AKA when I say manipulation, sales is convincing someone to do something that's not best for them. Okay, we're just going to call that manipulation. I think manipulation is actually a neutral term, but that's neither here nor there, different video. So the truth is, mastery level sales is actually that above statement inverted, right? So the limiting belief is that sales is leading somebody to do something that's not best for them. If you just turn that statement around, the opposite, if you invert it, that's actually what good sales is leading somebody to make the best decision for them, regardless if it's your product or not, okay? So one way to think about this is every prospect is not closable. That's also a myth. But you can help every prospect. And you can do this by leading them for the best decision for them. And sometimes, again, that means buying your product. Sometimes it's not. Now, how do you know you're leading them for the best decision for them, okay? Well, first and foremost, you have to, number one, identify what their problem is. What is a gap? We already talked about that in this training series. And then number two, you have to solve it. Now, when I say solve it, it's really telling them what you would do in their situation based on all of your experience working with, on seeing all of these customers and having all of this observation and knowing the product, knowing the market, being an expert in your field. So it's telling them what you would do if you were them. And that may not lead to buying your product. Okay, so I'm gonna give you an example. There's a guy, real estate marketing agency. And this was back when I was starting Closers.io, and it was just me selling on the phone. It was just me, that was it, right? And I understood this guy's situation. And he was maybe like 20K a month, wanted to get to 100K a month or something like that, I forget. But it was like, relatively startup phase. And he wanted to bring on some salespeople, I think, and recruit from us. But he wasn't really ready for it. And so what I did is I helped him understand, like, hey, you're not ready for this right now, but here's what you need to be doing right now. Number one, you need to be focusing on this. Number two, you need to be focusing on this. Number three, you need to be focusing on this. And this isn't just my opinion. Like, this is for me scaling my own business to where you want to go, and also working with and seeing hundreds of other clients during my experience and during my lifetime. Like, this is for sure what you need to do, et cetera, right? And so when I gave him that solution, even though it didn't have to do with buying my product, it gained massive trust, and the dude actually implemented, came back 2 weeks later and bought. So that's a good way to think about it. We'll talk about how that ties into moral authority in a little bit. Now, Jeremy Miner puts it, you don't want to be a product pusher, you want to be a problem solver. Okay, you want to be a problem solver, not a product pusher. It's a great way to think about it. You want to come in and solve problems. Again, I said this in the first video, sales, what is sales, right? Well, business is about solving problems. That's because when you solve a problem, you create value, people exchange money for the value. So if you know that to be true, sales is really a demonstration we could solve a problem for somebody else. But if there's no problem, there's no sale. So all you're doing on the sales call is you're identifying the problem or the unfulfilled desire, right? The gap, and then telling them what you would do in their situation if it was you, based on your experience, your expertise, working with all these other people in the same exact situation, having conversations like this all day, every single day. That's all you're doing. It may lead to buying your product, it may not. But you just want to make sure you give the accurate prescription, right? If you're a doctor, you might get comped a little bit more on one medication, not comped a little bit more on a different type of treatment. That shouldn't dictate your diagnosis, right, and your prescription. So if you're doing this, so to bring it full circle, if you're doing this on a sales call, everything I just mentioned, and your product works, right, that's a given, but if your product is good, then you are actually serving somebody you're not manipulating, okay? Next belief, rejection is personal. So rejection is not a reflection on your self-worth, okay? I used to put my self-worth on the line of every single sales call that I had, right? I would show up, and whether they did it or not was a direct reflection of my worth as a person. As you can imagine, that is not a good way to be, like, that's your career. You're taking 5, 6, 7 sales calls a day. I mean, that's not a good way to go through your day and your week and your career. It was tormenting, right? So a good way to think about it is that it never has anything to do with you and your worth as a person. It only can be a reflection of your skill set, the emotional baggage that somebody's bringing to the call, and their conditions, right? So your skill set's obvious. When I say emotional baggage they bring to the call, that could be, their past, their fear of making a decision, their fear of commitment. Now, a great salesperson, 99% of the time, your job is to actually work people through this, right? It's not an excuse of why they can't buy. No, your job is to help them work through this. But I will tell you, I've seen mastery level sales calls, really people that are good, who, somebody just won't get out of their own way. And the person's doing everything right. They spent 30 minutes, they've been looping, and it's just not gonna happen, right? Like this person is just totally in the wrong way or in their own way, and there's nothing you can do. It's a very, very small percentage of the time, but it is possible. More likely, it's also their conditions. So the product genuinely might not be right for them, okay? They also might have genuine reasons to wait, right? Like let's say they're getting a divorce, they're buying a home, have some sort of legal matter, they're exiting a company, right? All of those things are like genuine reasons you could wait, okay? They also just might have a financial condition, like they might have $200 in their bank account and 500 credit score and they're homeless. Like, look, we don't even want those people in our program, right? It's like a liability. So the other thing is do not attach yourself to the outcome. So this goes along with not taking rejection personally. You really want to detach yourself from the outcome, okay? So what do you attach yourself to? You attach yourself to executing the process to the best of your ability. You attach yourself to finding out if you can help them, and if so, exactly how that's going to work. And you attach yourself to figuring out if they are truly ready to commit to doing the things that they say they want to do and they're important to them, okay? To finding out if their actions align with their words, okay? So one of the things Alex Hormozi says is you're not after a purchase, you're after a decision, right? I totally agree with that. You want to get to the truth of if they're willing to commit to doing the things they say they want to do. Because as you'll find with sales calls when you get really good, most times they'll say they want to do all this stuff in the beginning, and then they'll say that they think your product is great, but then when the investment's on the line and things get a little bit uncomfortable, it's a stretch financially, their actions don't align with their words, even though they think what you have is the best way to get there. And they said that they want to do it, right? That they're committed, this and that. And so you see this cognitive dissonance happening. And your job as a salesperson is to really get to the truth of if their actions are going to align to their words, right? So next, or no, this is still under, no, this is the next one, sorry. The customer knows so this is the myth, right? The myth is that the customer knows their problem and knows what they need. Now, sometimes they do know what their problem is, they do know what they need, that's fine. So don't overthink this and get in your own way. But oftentimes, I'd say the majority of the time, prospects don't know what the problem actually is and therefore have a misdiagnosis of what they actually need. Okay, so I always tell our salespeople this is very key, listen to this. Most people aren't stuck, and this also goes for client success. Most people aren't stuck because they know what the problem is and they don't know how to fix it, okay? Instead, most people are stuck because they either don't know what the problem is or, more likely, they're trying to fix the wrong problem. Okay, so I'll repeat that. It's right here. Most people aren't stuck because they don't know, most people aren't stuck because they know what the problem is, but they don't know how to fix it. They're stuck because they don't know what the problem is, or they're trying to fix the wrong problem. So really serving somebody at the highest level means pursuing an accurate diagnosis. And what's funny is, and this goes for client success and it also goes for sales, once we can figure out the real problem, the real constraint that's holding them back to getting to the next level, when we can figure that out, the solution becomes obvious. The more clearly we can figure out what the real problem is, the more obvious the solution becomes. Now, I will tell you this, and we'll talk about how to do this later in this training series. Obviously, this could be a whole couple of videos itself. But when you do this, okay, and you can educate them on what the real problem is and then also what the real prescription is going to be, and you get them bought into that, they can internalize that belief, you win every single sale. Unless there's some crazy condition, you win every single sale. When you can hit that reframe, it is lay down city. Now, don't sometimes get in your own way. And sometimes, like we sell salespeople, right? Like we recruit and play salespeople for companies. Sometimes people just want salespeople. Like they need salespeople, they want salespeople, they're ready for salespeople. You don't need to reframe them on all this other stuff, right? So sometimes it's kind of first things first. Now, next belief, limiting belief, is that follow-up is annoying, okay? So follow-up is annoying when someone deliberately tells you to stop contacting them and then you keep contacting them, okay? That's unethical and annoying, all right? However, following up the way I'm gonna teach you later in this training series actually means providing immense value, and prospects will thank you for following up. And in my opinion also, it displays a lot of really great positive character traits, okay? As well as great customer service. And I think like even though your salesperson's not probably gonna be the one fulfilling on the service most times, what I do think is that essentially how you do one thing is how you do everything. Somebody in a sales or a company who has a really great sales team, really great follow-up, really great value based, like you can tell they're not forgetting about you, nothing's falling through the cracks. Almost always that company has great client success. It's just how you do one thing is how you do everything. So if somebody's really great at follow-up, we'll talk more about how to do that later, but I think highly of them, I think highly of the company, especially if they're doing it in a cool way, their client success is probably good. Okay, last limiting belief is what I call playing God. This is an advanced salesperson common pitfall mistake. It very much happens, it's probably not gonna happen in like software sales, right? But it's a lot in the coaching industry, your courses, or even services and different stuff like that. Is when you have an experienced salesperson and they get really, really good, and then maybe about 9 months to 12 months in, they start not making offers to the prospect who wants to purchase. Okay, who wants to purchase? They're very interested. They start not making offers simply because the salesperson, doesn't think the prospect's going to be successful and they think it's their responsibility to make that decision for them. Okay, so I'll repeat that. It's when an experienced salesperson most likely refuses to make an offer to a qualified prospect because they don't think the prospect's going to be successful, and instead of them allowing the prospect to make that decision for themselves, they think it's their responsibility to make that decision for them, okay? So let me kind of explain the nuance here. Look, if somebody is deliberately not a fit, or you were like, have this major conviction like, oh no, like this is not good for you, okay? I'm not saying you sell that person anyways, right? Like if they're deliberately not a fit, or you think doing this would put them in this really, really bad circumstance, then okay, fine, like don't sell them. I totally agree. But what happens a lot of times, and if you QC your salespeople, you'll pick this up with your experienced folks, is sometimes the salesperson, simply because the person has tough circumstances, won't offer them. And what I always tell people is that it's not your right to rob them of doing the things they say they want to do and taking the opportunity to take action on their goals. It's not your right to rob them of that opportunity. And so that doesn't mean you overpromise and start doing all this uncompliant stuff of, oh yeah, you're gonna make this amount of money, you're gonna do this, you're gonna do this, oh yeah, it's totally gonna work. No, like I would do quite the opposite. I'd say, look, you're in a really tough position. Like this is something to where I 100% can't guarantee it's going to work. What I can guarantee is you're gonna have the best tools in the industry and in the world for this type of thing to succeed. But I can't guarantee your results, and I can't guarantee that you're gonna be in the best position financially after you do this, because it is a stretch for you, and quite honest, like a lot of it depends on you, right? So obviously, I mean, that's not the best framing in the world, but you kind of get the point of what I was going for there. Is the difference is you really should still make the offer, but be straight up, be honest, set expectations, etc. And you will be stunned of how many customers who are in really tough situations just surprise the hell out of you. It's absolutely nuts. Okay, so mental cues for salespeople. Okay, so this used to be called frames, and then I changed it to mental cues because some of this is frames, but other of this stuff is just kind of like a cue or like a reminder of something you think about before or during or after the sales call, and it's just different ways to think about sales. Okay, and different ways that I've used to think about sales that have made me successful and also clients successful. And again, some of these are frames, some of these are not. So the first one's called the moral authority frame. So this is when the prospect believes with certainty that you have their best interests at heart. And when that happens, you have a tremendous amount of influence over them. So I'll give you a few examples that you'll get it, right? So I know a lot of content famous, kind of like public figures, this and that. And, like they'll say, I'll use Joe Rogan as an example. He's literally said this on his podcast. I don't know Joe Rogan, but, I've heard a lot of people run into this thing. So Joe Rogan says, for instance, look, I never look at comments. I never care what anybody says about me in the media. Like, unless you're in my inner circle, I don't care about your opinion of me. Now, if somebody in my inner circle who really knows me really well and who I really trust comes to me and gives me feedback and wants me to think about something differently or like take some criticism, then I'm 100% going to take that to heart. So what is the difference between somebody in Joe's inner circle and everybody else? It's moral authority, right? Moral authority frame. And so, I know in my experience, I know a ton of people who are kind of content famous, public figures, especially in our industry, who feel the same exact way. I've heard say the same exact things. Now, a different example of moral authority is, let's say a bus is driving down the street, and then all of a sudden, in the middle of the street is a police officer, and he's got his hand up like this. His hand up like this. Is the bus going to stop? Well, number one, the bus doesn't want to hit the police officer. Duh. Doesn't want to hit anybody. But number two, the bus is going to stop. And the reason they do that is because they believe that police officer has their best interests in heart, right? The police officer is supposed to be a public servant that's really supposed to be able to serve and help everybody in the community. So obviously, that person's going to stop, right? Because they don't know why at the time, but they believe it's for some reason of the greater good. So more importantly, how do you establish moral authority, okay? Big thing to know is it's earned, not given. Okay? Now, how to earn it is not rocket science, believe it or not. Is number one, you must genuinely want what's best for the person. Number two, you must attach your own self-interests to knowing that long term, this is going to be the better thing for you. Gaining moral authority, doing the right thing for the person, no matter what the circumstances are, even if it doesn't benefit you in the short term, long term, that's better for you, even if it's bad now. Okay? Now, I would say, and actually before I redid this training, it said just completely detach your self-interest altogether. Okay? But realistically, I think that's, I think it's tough for people. I think it's like, it goes against our nature, whether you like it or not. Like, we're all self-interested or, have a lot of interest for ourselves altogether. Like, we do things that benefit us. Okay? That's our nature. That's how we survive. So I do think that, yes, you can look at it as completely just serving the person, detaching all of your self-interest, but I actually think what's going to make you more compliant and even better at this is if you really associate how doing this is better if you think in terms of decades, not days, right? Long term, you're going to build a better network, be around amazing people, have a lot of influence around your circles, all of that stuff, if you really take on this frame, which means, and this is the third thing, is sacrificing the short term and be willing to advise somebody to do something that doesn't benefit you right now in this moment, in the short term. Okay? Maybe it doesn't benefit you long term either. But regardless, no matter what it is, always just thinking about, if I was this person, what would I do? And keeping yourself, don't project yourself and your own self-interest into the conversation whatsoever. So this might take forms in a few different ways, okay? The obvious one is like, okay, you don't really think your product's the best thing for the person, you refer them to somebody else, and you immediately lose the sale, right? It could mean that. What actually a lot of times it more likely means, and this is why this is so powerful in sales, is sometimes this could actually make you the sale even in the short term. And so as an example, let's say most salespeople, yeah, we can do that, yeah, we can do that, oh yeah, our product does that, oh yeah, and they're just kind of like yes men, and they're just not being a straight shooter, okay? Whereas on the contrary, like if you're the one person who is very straight up with expectations, you're very straight up with like the flaws of your product, and because of those, who it's not for and who it's for, okay? And the person, especially it's like if the person comes away and is like, look, that person's a real straight shooter, even if you're a little bit blunt sometimes, right? It might not be, oh, pow, nicey, oh yeah, we can do, we'll do anything. Sometimes it's a little bit blunt, like it's a little bit abrasive. But people come away, oh, that guy's a straight shooter. You have so much more trust. And then when you say something, they believe what you say. And a good way to think about it is like, as soon as somebody catches you doing something that's completely against your own self-interest, but you're doing it because it's for their benefit, their trust in you goes way up, right? I think there was a Cialdini study actually where a waiter would, if he told somebody on the menu that, oh, that menu item's not good, actually I would do this less expensive thing. So it looks like in the short term, he's going directly against his self-interest. In the long term, and not that much long term later, that person would get better tips because they're tipping that person because they believed, again, moral authority, right? So it also really helps moral authority if you are an expert in your field, because if you're an expert, you're far more likely to be able to know and advise what's actually good for the person. You're going to be much more likely to lead them to the best thing for them. And again, that could lead to your product as a byproduct of that, or it might not, right? Or like it could be something to where in that sales conversation, we have a little bit of friction on the front end because you got to reveal some flaws. You got to be straight up about what it's not for. But because you did that, you have a lot more trust and you actually make the sale, maybe on a lower tier product or whatever, but you have also a much better lifetime customer. So hopefully you're familiar with that. Let's move on. Next one is a really short reminder and mental cue. This is called the 3 rules of sales. I learned this from my mentor, Taylor Welch. I think it's really good, so I just want to share it with you guys. So 3 rules. Your job is to lead the prospect to what's best for them. What's best for them is almost always outside of their comfort zone. Prospects fight like hell to stay inside their comfort zone, right? A lot of wisdom in those 3 rules, right? And it goes back to that moral authority thing, but also really kind of at the end of the call, remembering that serving somebody and doing what's best for them doesn't mean being a yes man and just rolling over and letting the prospect do whatever they want. Sometimes you have to take a stand and really help the prospect get through their fear, get through their projection, get through their BS, and align their actions with their words and make decisions out of a place of vision, not out of a place of current circumstances, which, if done, is going to render more of what? The same circumstances. So next one is the prize frame. This one I think can actually be kind of toxic, but it is worth mentioning. So the price frame. You're the best in the world at what you do. They need your help, not the other way around. They're lucky to have the opportunity to work with you. If they say no, it's their loss. Now, the issue with this is people learn this, and then they're like on their podium, oh, I'm this high ticket closer. You know, you're lucky to be speaking with me. This call's gonna go how I say it's gonna go. You know, it's like, come on, dude. I'm the prize. Like, I just think like people or even read Pitch Anything or in Clapp's book, which is a great book, but then just start acting crazy on sales calls and just start being a dick, quite frankly. And I think the wrong way to do this is to hold like a better than frame to your prospects where you're up here and they're down here, right? I 100% think it's better than being a complete rollover, but it's not mastery level salesperson. It's very, very similar to, you know, if you look in dating, especially for guys, right? First, there's the nice guy to where he's just a rollover, doesn't have any boundaries, doesn't take a stand for themselves. Then there's the jerk who is like, you know, I'm up here, you're down here. It's all about this person, not about the other person. You know, their actions aren't conscientious of the other person's feeling and decisions, etc. Then you actually have like the alpha male, right? Which is, or, you know, like whatever, like attractive guy. I don't know what the word would be. But the next level above the jerk is when you're somebody who just has healthy boundaries, right? You're not a rollover, but you're also not a jerk. And you're not less than like the nice guy. You're not better than like the jerk, but you're actually equal to. Okay? And a lot of that comes through working with your own emotions and et cetera. But to digress, it's very, very similar to the price frame thing. It can be misconstrued as kind of the jerk, right? The better than, all right? And that's not really what we want to go for here. What we want to really focus on, the mental cue of the price frame can help a lot of people sometimes when they're first starting off as that less than, right? Like the opposite of this is like what you don't want to do is come on the call and you're like, oh my God, you know, prospect, you know, thank you so much. Like this is such an opportunity and this and that to be speaking with you. And like where you're like overly grateful that they allowed you to speak with them. Like that's what we want to avoid, right? And so the price frame is more of like, hey, we're in this place where we're equal and this is my domain. I'm an expert in this domain and I'm really excited to like see what your problem is and I know I can provide tremendous value. And in the back of your head, you do have that little bit of healthy ego where you're like, man, like this person is so lucky to speak with me. Like I'll tell you this, if I've scaled our company to this year we should finish over 50 million. So I've done that in record time. That's really great for my industry. And if I took a sales call, right? If I took a sales call and it was for our services and I was speaking to somebody doing $1 million a year, in the back of my head a little bit, there's that healthy ego of like, wow, this is like, I should charge for this sales call, right? Like the fact that they're getting my one-on-one time and I can explain to them and understand their problem and tell them what to do, whether that's my product or not, run through everything I'm talking about with you guys right now. The fact that they're gonna get that opportunity with me is like, they should be paying me just for the call, right? So that's kind of like that price frame. Now I'm not gonna come out as a better than Dick, okay? So hopefully you understand that nuance. Moving on, we have detachment from the outcome. So we've kind of already covered this one a little bit, but this is another mental cue. And this is one that before every sales call I always used to repeat the mantra and think about the following, is ruthless detachment from the outcome, and then attach yourself to 3 different things. Flawless execution of the process, getting to the truth of what they want, what's keeping them from doing it, and if their actions are gonna be aligned to their words, but you already talked about that. And then finally, and this one's really important, number 3, is having fun. Because if we're attached just to the process, and our goal is to execute that flawlessly and have fun while doing it, like enjoy ourselves in the moment and just enjoy the dance of sales. That is really the key of getting in the flow state. And if you played sports, it's just the difference between being really in your head, having anxiety, and just not like, you're just not in like your peak state of sports performance, versus like when you're out there and you're just like having fun. Like you'll hear pro basketball and football players say all the time, like, hey, we need to get back to having fun. And that's because it's one of those things, you're just totally in the present moment. You have this really like sense of joy and purpose and like fun, and it's just a blast. And that's where your best performance comes from. So I always think about those 3 things. And again, when you could do that, right? When you can think of detach yourself from the outcome ruthlessly, attach yourself to these 3 things. When you can do that, you can actually not get the sale and still win, which is huge because then we can start lining up win, 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 win. And if we take 10 sales calls and close 5, we can still have 10 wins, right? If we do that, right? So that's very, very key. It helps you keep you also in, not in ruts, because there's ebbs and flows in sales. And sometimes you got to be really mentally strong. If you hit a really tough, 10 prospects and you have no closes, but you feel like you've done everything right, you have to have that internal compass to know that you're still doing the right things. It's just an ebb and flow. Okay? Very, very key. So last one for the mental cues and frames is the expert frame. So we've also talked about this one a little bit. So let's go through it. This is also called the doctor frame. I kind of combined them. So you've probably heard the doctor, if like you go into the doctor's office and you sit down with a doctor, they ask you about your problems. You're explaining what's going on, what's happening, etc. They ask pointed question, pointed question, pointed question. Eventually they make a diagnosis and then they give you a prescription, okay? It's very, very similar to a sales call. We'll talk more about that later, obviously, as we get into the training. But again, like we make one diagnosis, we make one prescription, and we do that with ultimate certainty that that diagnosis is correct and that prescription is correct, right? We're not giving, the doctor doesn't say, okay, you can take 3 different types of medication and they're different price points. Which one do you want to do? Like, that's not what we do, okay? They're also, the doctor's not, all of a sudden like coaching somebody in the middle of their question asking and before their diagnosis and then getting way off track and doing this and that. They're also not like overly crazy about rapport. Like there's a little bit of rapport, right? But they usually come in pretty authoritative. Hey, how you doing? How's the day? Okay. Hey, tell me what's going on. And then it's, follow-up question, follow-up question, follow-up question. Then they get a clear idea of the situation, do some examination, boom, prescription. And they make the diagnosis, they make the prescription, and it's with absolute certainty. And it's like, this is what you need to do, right? You're not giving options. So again, we'll talk more about that later, but it's a very, very good frame to always think about and hold on the call. Now, kind of combined with this is this expert frame. So what I want you guys to think about is you may not be as accomplished as the person you're talking to, but your goal is to be an expert or higher status in the specific context of what you're selling. right? So a great example of this contextual expertise and contextual being higher status in a certain context is, Oren Klaff tells this in his book, there's the surgeon versus the golf pro, right? Like a surgeon in general, in, you know, kind of our Western economy, is known as very, very high status, right? In almost any setting generally, right? But if this person goes and plays a one-on-one golf match with the golf pro, who's higher status in that context, right? The golf pro, because he's a specialist in that one thing. So doing that, you want to do the same with what you're selling. So if you're, let's say, helping people do C-suite recruiting or something, and you have a startup who's trying to build a C-suite team, they have that problem, you're the expert in that problem. In that context, you're actually and should be higher status due to your expertise, which also puts you in a place to provide way more value, okay? So achieving that expertise, a lot of people are like, oh my God, you know, how do I do that? It's actually not that hard. So here's the steps. You learn everything about your field that you can, okay? So learn in your field, in your market, learn everything that you can. Then also within that, learn everything you can about the problem that you're solving, okay? So remember, they're on this call because they have this problem and don't know how to solve it, most likely. So just by the nature of you understanding that problem really well, almost always you're gonna be more of an expert in them in this context. You can get ahead of this in like 2 weeks sometimes. Might take a little bit longer. But again, it's all about just specializing in that context. So how else do you do it? You study your product, which solves the problem. You study your customers who've used your product and achieved results and solved this problem. And then also you remember that, especially as you get experience as a salesperson, you've had hundreds or thousands of these conversations and seen all these people in different businesses or different lives with this problem. And also all of your customers and testimonials who've taken the product and solved this problem. And you have this amazing ability to recognize patterns based on all of this data you've observed over your, the last 6 months or year, however long you've been selling, that almost nobody is going to have. And that is immensely valuable. That's why a lot of times what I do when I'm trying to influence a client or influence somebody on a sales call is I'm like, hey, this is not just my opinion, First of all, like I've had this problem and then I solved this myself. And, I've helped 2,000 other people do the same as well. And I'm networked with some of the top people in our industry here doing 8 figures, multiple 8 figures, even a few doing 9 figures, the top of the top. I know how their business works. I know who they are. I know what they do. And from what I've observed through that and through all of this stuff is that generally this is what you need to do, right? Generally in your situation, here's the best way to attack this problem. So you see how I'm kind of using this massive amount of observation I have as a way to really get that expert frame and build a lot of proof and a lot of trust and a lot of buy-in before I make a certain recommendation, okay? And that recommendation could be on my product or it could be, just something else I'm trying to get somebody to believe. Maybe it's a client, okay? So again, you have that pattern recognition ability, really lean on that. Now, moving on to some really important stuff. This is short and sweet, but it's probably the most important part of this entire video. Cultivating conviction. Okay, so conviction is how strongly you believe your product or service is the most valuable solution to get from current state to desired state, right? So it's the best, strongest bridge from Hell Island to Heaven Island. Like we talked about that. You want to be, there's multiple bridges to get across Hell to Heaven Island, right? We want to be the best one, the strongest, fastest, shortest, etc., the most sturdy. And, in sales and business terms, it's really what's the best bridge? It's the most valuable one, right? And a great way to think about it again is Alex Mosey's value equation, right? You have time delay, effort and sacrifice on the bottom, dream outcome, and I think it's perceived likelihood of achievement on the top, right? And the highest number is really the most that's what gives you your value equation, right? And so you want to have your personal conviction that out of all different methods and products and things your market could do to achieve result, right? Yours is the most valuable, okay? So this is really the X factor in sales. Everything being equal, conviction's always, the salesperson with the most conviction is always going to outperform. And in fact, even if you look at an average salesperson versus a very experienced one, but average one has massive conviction, experienced one does not, or maybe has a little bit of doubt, average one's gonna kick its ass. And the average one, because they are so much more passionate about it, will eventually just invest in themselves and actually become very, very advanced, okay? So this is very key. Like a great example of this is, let's say you have a coaching program helping women optimize their hormones and do this through dietary changes and testing, et cetera. Let's say you have a client whose life has been changed by this product and they become a salesperson. They don't have that much experience. And then you have another guy who's like a rugged car sales guy selling this women's hormonal release product, right? Whatever it is. Okay, who do you think is going to win, right? Obviously the previous client, even though they might have very rudimentary sales skills, they have massive conviction. They're going to be relate to the market. They know the market. They are the market. You know, they've been through this process. Like, they're going to kick that person's ass, and they're just going to be so much more relatable. They're going to understand like all these things that makes a huge difference. Doesn't mean you should always hire your clients, but it's a great example of when it can work really, really well. So how do you cultivate conviction? It's actually pretty straightforward, right? Number one, sell something you're naturally drawn to, you're naturally passionate about, okay? You should have a strong belief about it from the beginning that it cultivates more and more and more and more as you start even selling it and start working for the company, right? So I was selling for a different company who was like a marketing company. So my first sales job, we mainly went after real estate agents. And you know, the product was not great, to be candid. I think we kind of told ourselves it was good. It was my first job. I didn't know what good products were and bad products were. I was just trying to not get fired at the time. And eventually, as I started to get really, really good, I started following these guys, and they were called Traffic and Funnels. And I remember consuming their marketing and buying a few of their products and all this stuff. And I thought to myself, like, man, if I sold that, I'd be the best person on the team. Like, if I sold that, like what I said to myself actually was, I was born to sell something like that. And I mean, that's what I would like. I wasn't being necessarily 100% serious, but like that would be the type of stuff that would go through my head. Is that like, man, I'm like born to sell something like this. Like I would just crush this thing. And I was so passionate at the time about what they were doing. And so that's number one. Also, you know, once you're in, study and use the product. Study and use other products. Like again, your thesis should really be the best way for my market, this market, to go from current to desired situation is blank, right? Is what you're selling. If you don't believe that, sell something else, right? But you have to be able to believe that. And out of all the bridges that are out there to go from Hell Island to Heaven Island, you have to believe yours is the most valuable. It's going to make a huge difference. Also, just be heavily involved with the community created by your product. Watch and remind yourself of testimonials of people that you sold daily. Have a thank you for enrolling me folder. Like every single time somebody sends you a message, hey, thanks, the treatment or the coaching or whatever it was that you sold, it's been life-changing, etc. Anytime that you have that, you know, happen, create a folder, and then you can go through that on a daily basis. It really helps you remind yourself what you're doing is important. It changes lives, etc. Another one, this little counterintuitive, have faith in your ability to make it right. I always tell this to our salespeople is like, hey, like you're kind of borderline and like you're not sure if we can really help this person or not. At the end of the day, still make the offer. You know, don't make false promises, but like still make the offer and still have that conviction, because at the end of the day, if they get in and we know it's not right from the get and maybe you made a misdiagnosis, we'll just refund that person. It's fine, you know? And so a big thing is just have faith in your ability to make it right. Like at the end of the day, if you know you have great values, great integrity, and you're going to take care of people at the end of the day, if you make the wrong decision in the sales process on the front end, you can take care of that usually pretty immediately, and everybody comes out unscathed. The last one is have high standards for yourself. And a way I like to think about it is having a high say-do ratio for yourself. Say-do ratio, what we say we want to do, or what we say we're going to do versus what we do is 1-to-1. We say we're going to do this, we do it. Okay? 1-to-1 say-do ratio. If you say you're going to wake up at 5 a.m., wake up at 5 a.m. If you say you're going to work out at 6 a.m., work out at 6 a.m. If you say you're going to make this amount of cold calls, make this amount of cold calls. When you start cultivating those high standards and high say-do ratio, it builds a massive amount of confidence. And having those high standards for yourself and just being a master of managing oneself, it makes you a leader of others. And it also makes you somebody who just naturally through their life carries conviction. Your words will hold more weight because of that. So last but not least, cultivating flow state. Instead of flow state, I always kind of like saying poise. Again, like these are just mental cues for yourself, right? So for me, that mental cue I like to say was poise. Poise is a calm sense of certainty under pressure. I think about it like, Michael Jordan getting the ball with 10 seconds left in the NBA Finals. He's got to make a game-winning shot, right? He's got poise. He's got that calm sense of certainty under pressure. Another little word I like to use is called resolve, which means it's this feeling as if it's already done. It's already a given. Like if you've ever not achieved a goal yet, but you're well on your way to achieving that goal and like you knew it's just a given. Like it's gonna happen. There's no way it doesn't happen. Like I remember, I always had a goal to have $1 million in the bank account, right? And probably when I was at like 600 grand, I had, based on how my business was doing at the time, I just had resolve like, oh yeah, it's done. Like it's not even my goal anymore because it's literally done. Like it's already hit, even though that money's not in the bank account yet, right? It's that resolve. And you probably had feelings like that, in the past among a lot of different situations, whether it's sports or whether it's even in your own sales calls or whatever. But having that resolve, it's not this high like certainty, like Tony Robbins, yes, yes. Like it's not like that, right? It's this calm sense of certainty under pressure. It's poise. So how do you cultivate that state? Number one, this is very, very key. Place all your attention and energy onto the prospects and the words that they're saying. You almost want to meditate. If you meditation is huge, honestly, for mindset. And I really should have made that a key tenet of this training, is like meditation is so key for sales because it helps you listen and focus so much. Now, going beyond that, what you want to do is once you're practicing meditation, when you're actually on the call, you have to rest your attention on the words that they're saying and also their body language and their mannerisms. Like you want to be just totally focused on them. And when you do that, a couple things happen. Number one, like you're kind of meditating on them, as weird as that sounds. But you're doing that, it's going to take all the pressure off you, it eliminates all nervousness, and this is what's kind of woo-woo, but it is very, very true. The right thing to do or say will naturally come through you in the moment, okay? You just have to trust your training up into this point. You have to trust that you're going to do the right thing spontaneously in the moment, okay? Now, if that doesn't happen, you got to do some more training, okay? But, you're much, much more better off just being 100% and stuff is going to start coming through. Also, it's like if you're taking notes, whether that's on the laptop or pen and pad, I started with pen and pad. When you're taking notes, when these things come through you, right, you can write them down and make a note to be able to ask that question later, so on and so forth. So very, very, very key there. You really want to lose yourself in the enjoyment of the process. Like at the peak, these calls will feel like truly an art form, like fun, an art form, like you're pursuing this perfection, just making your influence as good as it can be. And the last thing I'll leave you off with is if you read The Inner Game of Tennis, okay? If you read The Inner Game of Tennis, that's a phenomenal book on having the right mindset, especially towards sales. It's really a sports performance book, but it works really great through sales. One of the things you'll get from that, and I'll leave you with this, this is one of the most, I think it's going to be in the next training, but it's one of the most important things you can actually do for your mindset in sales is consistently review and listen to your best sales calls over and over. And I mean, I'm telling you, some of the ones I've listened to these calls. This is one with this guy named Fred. I've listened to that call 100 times. I'm not even kidding. 2x speed, I'm just listening to myself, just win, sound really good, be at peak performance. I'm reminding myself, I'm good at this, I've done this 1,000 times. Here's me making the sale, closing the deal, helping this person. Always, reviewing a win a day is going to keep the sales manager away. And with that being said, I'll leave you off with this training. Hopefully it was helpful. We'll see you in the next training.